Hi there, and welcome to the show that's all about celebrating all the shapes, sizes, and colors of diversity as well as adversity, and seeks to inspire the world through authentic conversations that are both meaningful and relatable. Each episode, I deep dive into the extraordinary journey of an average yet super incredible person in the diversity space. We talk about everything from their personal accomplishments and/or contributions to social impact to some of the adversity they've had to face along the way and the resiliency and tenacity that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Tisha Gillespie, and this is Not Your Average Goat. This week, I am so excited to introduce you to one of the most bubbly personalities I've had the pleasure of knowing, my dear friend and former work sister, Braelyn Rasco. Brae is a true illustration that you can be the evidence of your loved ones without being the evidence of traumatic circumstances. In this conversation, we talk about Brae's lifelong passion for creativity, including writing, drawing, and the special tether she has to her mom through dance. We also talk about the immense and incredible power, and sometimes detrimental power, that social media has on our lives today, and both Brae and I reflect on our young memories of the 9/11 tragedy. Then we deep dive into her experience growing up with a parent who had chronic vertigo and some of the regret she still has today about not fully understanding the illness back then, as well as shrugging off some unique burdens placed on her. And we set the stage for her mother's very tragic suicide that happens when Brae is just 18 years old. I am so excited for you to hear Brae's inspirational story, so let's get started. Brae, it's been way too long. I can't believe that we started working at this company 5 years ago. And the first time I met you was actually almost 5 years ago. I think in like 2 more months, it'll be like 5 years exactly. And I'm so excited to sit down and talk to you and just really explore your journey. So just thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Oh, Tisha, of course. I mean, I know I mentioned this in our first conversation, but I am so honored to be here and to be talking with you. I miss you. I miss working with you. You're such an amazing person, and truly thank you for, giving me this opportunity to just be on your podcast. And I cannot believe it's been 5 years. I mean, it feels like yesterday, like talking with you, it feels like no time has passed, but at the same time that so much time has passed because so many wonderful things have happened, obviously, in the last 5 years, So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. You've always been someone who I've looked up to because your personality is just so bubbly. You're always so energetic and just so genuine and kind. Like I remember, so when I joined at the company we worked at, you actually were not there on day one. When you came in the next day, you just came up being like, oh my gosh, you're the new person. I'm so happy to meet you. And you just made me feel so welcome. And I will always appreciate that. And I always kind of take on that big sister type of mentality. And so it's just been so awesome watching you kind of grow throughout your career and all the leaps that you've taken. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Oh my gosh. No, thank you so much, Tisha, for that. And it goes right back at you. And meeting you, I do feel like it's changed my life. Not only did I view you as just this force to be reckoned with, your stuff. You're so digitally savvy. I've learned so much from you. I'm so happy that our paths crossed at the time it did. And what's so funny? I just have to share this. So do you remember the steamer that you gave me at work? Like that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, okay. I think it was your wedding gift, right?
Yes. So we actually were at a wedding this past weekend. And I was like, we travel with the steamer all the time. And I'm always like, oh my gosh, this is my Tisha steamer. Oh. And I was talking to Jacob, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting down and chatting with Tisha. Like, we just kind of like reconnect. It was just kind of weird, like this past weekend, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just like thinking of you. And it's just like one of those little stories and moments of like our time together. And it even goes back to like being in the office together. And as I reflect back, just to really think, like, I'm just really like grateful I had that time with you in the office and to learn from you. And you definitely bring that big sister energy. I mean, you made me feel loved from the get-go, and your intentions as far as wanting to help me grow professionally and personally, I've always felt that. So.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. Firstly, I'm just glad that steamer still works after like 5 years.
It works. We love it. We actually like really love it. So thank you.
Oh my gosh, that's so great. I don't remember exactly when I learned this about you when we were working together, but I remember we were talking about something and you shared something like very like kind of personal and dear and vulnerable about yourself and your story that, like you had lost your mom to suicide. And I just remember when you shared that, I don't exactly remember the details around like what, like the conversation that kind of triggered it, but I just remember thinking like, wow, like Brae went through something so traumatic, so young, and just look at the person she is and just look at who you are today. And so like, I think that has always just inspired me. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to bring you on the show for you to share your story with everyone else, because I think it'll be so inspiring for everyone else too.
Thank you so much, Tisha. Thank you. I said it in the beginning too, but you're already making me emotional over here, and that means a lot to me. So thank you.
So Brae, I would love to know if you can kind of go back in time and think about yourself. What do you remember about being like 8, 9 years old? Like thinking about your personality and kind of like your passions today. How did that differ back when you were like 8 or 9?
It's really crazy how some things in your life, as time goes on, as you grow older, really how much of that like inner child is still with you. And I mean that in the sense of one of the main things I absolutely remember is just being really creative and in all different ways. This would be 8, 9, maybe I was a little bit older, but everyone had a TV in their room and I had a Macintosh computer. Okay. So if I wasn't, playing Oregon Trail or something like that, I was writing short stories. Every single night I would write just type up and write stories. Obviously, I was a little kid, so it was like one key, after another, like as you type, it wasn't like zooming through, but I always loved storytelling and I loved to read from a very young age. Also, whether it was like drawing, coloring, I've danced my whole life. So that creative expression has always been really important to me. I also was, I think I've just like been that ball of energy since I was little. I have people tell me all the time, like as far as like family and family friends go, how I was just kind of very animated as a person. And even as I'm sitting here talking, I'm talking with my hands. And I think that's like funny too to think about as I reflect back.
So do you remember any of the stories that you wrote, kind of like the themes or like topics that you would write about?
Oh my gosh, I do. And I have to say my genre, it's kind of shifted as far as like what I read currently, or maybe, one day I do hope to have my own book and to be an author. But almost like Gossip Girly type stuff. Yeah. I just kind of make up like teenage drama type stuff. So, and I even think that we had writing competitions, but at the same time, I actually want to, touch on this a little bit. We had writing competitions growing up or in elementary school. And I from very early on, I remember, I think I was in fourth grade. So, for example, when 9/11 happened, I was young. I was in fourth grade. My story was around 9/11 essentially. And it was almost this like fictional take on like what it was almost like how I saw like how things could have been stopped. And I know it's like really intense and deep, and but I'm saying like, so at the same time, I definitely was like kind of incorporating like real world events into like my writing. And that's something that I think about too. I'm like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And I think about that.
Like putting yourself back in your like fourth grade body. Do you remember when you heard about 9/11, what you initially thought and like how you reacted?
So I definitely remember I was actually like at the bus stop when it kind of, because, and I'm thinking too, right? I grew up in Indiana, so Central Time. Because I've even looked back on the timeline of these things that kind of like match up. Like, is that like a concrete memory? Like, was I at the bus stop? So I do remember distinctly being at the bus stop and a couple parents being there, right? Like dropping off their kids. We were like waiting, and I heard like, oh my gosh, like a plane, flew into the towers. I remember hearing that. And of course, I don't think I understood really I didn't really grasp, what was actually happening. And I remember getting to school and all of the TVs were on at school, right? With the news on. I don't think I definitely didn't like fully understand really like what any of that meant. But what I do remember is going home, right? And sitting with my mom and my dad on the couch and seeing the news on and seeing how it made my dad and my mom feel. And that goes back to, I definitely would, I'm an empath to the extreme. I mean, I am in therapy to help me navigate that. But I think that was something early on I even started, because I remember feeling this really overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, what can I do? Because I saw my mom and my dad like so upset, and that always stuck with me.
So I believe I was in sixth grade, and we had temporarily moved back to Florida from Maryland, and I had not yet started school in Florida yet. So I had like a free day, and I remember watching the footage. Like we had the news channel on, and I remember watching the footage on TV and just watching the planes go into the Twin Towers. And that was in the morning. And like all throughout the day, they just kept replaying it and replaying it. And then I remember later on that evening, my aunt called to talk to my mom. And so I also kind of got on the phone with my aunt and was talking to her. And I remember saying to her, it seems like it was on purpose. Like, how did they not avoid the towers? Like, it looks like they flew into the towers on purpose. And she was like, Tisha, they did fly into them on purpose. And I was just like, it was just so hard for me to wrap my head around why someone would want to intentionally not just kill hundreds or thousands of people, but also kill themselves too. And I just didn't I was still pretty young, and I didn't really understand government and foreign relations and all the challenges that we were having with other countries. And I think for us who were still kind of young at that time, to have such an interesting, a different perspective, it would be, I think it's so interesting now to think about it being in textbooks, and for Gen Z and I think it's Alpha now, to actually read about it and not have been alive at all. So,
gosh, I mean, let's be real. You read that stuff and you think it's happened so long ago, it's like this history. And then to think that wow, and it's almost like I've actually read a lot of interesting art, from, especially with our age and our demographic, it was ever since then, it's almost like it's been nonstop.
All the rippling effects that it had on our country, especially the TSA was not a thing before 9/11.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's so crazy to think about.
Oh, totally. And, and I just want to say too, I was, born and raised in Indiana when I moved out to Virginia. And kind of being in the DMV, that was really eye-opening to me, honestly. Like just knowing that the Pentagon was 10 minutes from where I was living. When I was living in the DC area, I definitely thought so many times, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
There are times like when I get into a line to board a plane and I'm going through security, it's like, oh, you don't need to take off your shoes, or, oh, you don't need to take off your coat. And I'm walking through and I'm just like, I really wish you would tell us to take off our shoes and coat.
Yes.
It's such a pain in the ass to do so, but I really wish you would tell us to do it, because just living so close to DC, I would be lying if I said I haven't thought about getting up in that plane and taking off and being worried that someone was going to hijack the plane to try to, I don't know, like crash it into the White House or crash it into like one of the monuments or something. Like that has definitely crossed my mind a couple times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also wrote a few short stories. So a lot of them were kind of like around like the teen drama and things like that. But I also wrote one that was like, I was trying to be suspense. I was like huge into Nancy Drew when I was in middle school. And so I was like trying to write like a Nancy Drew-esque type of short story. I don't have it anymore, unfortunately. So sadly enough, I ended up like I had this binder with like all my stories, and I also wrote poetry, like a ton of poetry.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
it's nice to hear that.
I wrote so much, but unfortunately, like one of my boyfriends, like when I was younger, I like gave him the binder to like read all my stuff, and like just never got it back. So, but anyway, but no, I loved poetry. And when I was in high school, we did this thing called slam poetry. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, but
yes, of course.
I did it. Yeah. And for those of you who don't know what it is, it's like performance poetry. So you basically take a poem and you kind of like act it out, and like you turn it into like a soliloquy or like a monologue, and like add emotion behind it. And it was really cool. And like I would actually go to some like local coffee houses too when I was in high school, and they would have open mics, and I would do some slam poetry too. It was a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh, I love that, Tisha. That is awesome. And to anyone who needs watch 21st Jump Street, there's a little slam poetry part in the movie with it's with Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum. That's a side note, but I love that, Tisha. That's so awesome. It's badass.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I saw myself and kind of still see myself as a nerd and a dork, but I had fun doing it. So.
Oh yeah, I always tell Jacob #proud nerd. Like I'm
exactly
proud nerd. So.
You actually started doing like dancing, like competitive dancing when you were very, very young. How old were you when your mom put you into that?
I think I started at like 6 years old, and then kind of danced and competed, of course, in the recitals and everything. But then getting into high school is when I started doing like the dance team. Definitely gravitated towards kind of that contemporary dance, just because I feel like you can put a lot of your feelings and like emotion into dancing like that, which is something that's just really resonated with me. And then definitely love my hip hop classes too. So those were my favorite, and acro probably growing up too, just because I loved the thing with like dance, and like especially dance that, is like maybe even acro style. You can see the work so, immediately. Like you put it in, and then you finally land that really cool like dance move into a flip type thing. And like I loved seeing that like final result, and like kind of to keep like learning these new skill sets. That's what I've also like really liked about dance, because it takes time. There's you got to kind of have that patience, and it's like a continual, skill that you work towards every single day. And I still love it. I watch all the dance shows on TV. So You Think You Can Dance, all of that stuff, because it's such a beautiful art to me.
That's so cool. We recently, me and Chris, started doing ballroom dancing again. So we did ballroom dancing back in 2016 to prepare for our first dance for our wedding. And then we basically went on hiatus after that. And so last September, we started doing ballroom dancing again. And oh my gosh, I love it. So it's been almost a year, and we're doing salsa, bachata, rumba, and tango. So I've set these dreams. We can talk about this too, but one of my dreams of the next 10 years is to be a competitive, capable dancer. I don't know if I actually want to compete. Like, I want to have the ability to compete. Now, whether I actually compete, like, that's a different story, but I want to be that good that I could compete.
I love that, Tisha. And I have no doubt that you will get there. And I love that. You know, this goes back to, it is never too late, right? To like follow those passions and dreams that you've always had.
Yeah. I mean, and speaking of being a storyteller, which I love so much, like that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast. Like my passion for storytelling is why I wanted to start this podcast, because, you know, I actually thought that when I started out my career, I was going to be in a more like journalistic type of role. I never thought that I was going to be where I was today. Like just never fathomed like this is where I was going to be. And it is so that I'm here, but I've never really lost that passion for storytelling and interviewing. I love hearing people's stories, especially if they've gone through a journey that's so different from what I've gone through. Like, I love it. I eat it up. And I love sharing those with other people too, because I also think there's a lot of value and impact that people's stories can have on other people.
I'm so with you with just the power of, I always kind of like to say, it's like the power of like people. It's the power of perspective. Like it's so much. And I love hearing other people's stories too. It truly, like, it fuels me. And it's probably why I love documentaries so damn much. Can't get enough of them. I am obsessed. I'm constantly telling people which documentaries to watch. When I know a new doc, I'll always tell Jacob, like, oh, like the new docuseries on like, you know, XX. It's like, I love it. And especially when it's one of those like very inspirational, just very authentic. I think that's what kind of just like organically helps inspire the next person.
So going back to your early dancing days, do you have any specific memories that stand out to you, like when you were in the dance academy?
I do. And it kind of goes back to my mom. And every single day I improv dance. I wake up at I was going to say 6. That's a stretch. I wake up closer to 7:30. I improv dance right away. I put my AirPods in. I have my certain playlists that get me in my feels. It's really my way of expression. And I almost feel like my mom getting me into dance at such a young age, it was almost like this. I like to look at things like this, right? Because you kind of have to in certain situations, but I view dancing as a gift from my mom. And it was almost like the world knew I wasn't going to have her forever, but now I have this art that I can really express myself through. And knowing that my mom is the reason why I have it is very meaningful to me. And one of my, favorite memories of just dancing growing up is always seeing my mom at that window. So when you dance at a dance academy, there's very tiny windows looking in, at least the one that I danced at growing up. And my mom was always the mom. You would see the parents start trickling in where people were trying to see through the windows. My mom was always that person at that front window. And my friends who dance with me, they remember that as well. I actually had a really beautiful gift, that my best friend did for me for my 30th birthday this last year, where she reached out to my closest friends and families for memories of my mom. And every single friend that danced with me growing up, they didn't even know they were sharing the same memory, but it was seeing your mom at like the dance, like the window at like our dance academy, like cheering us on, like so excited.
So I remember shortly after meeting you, you told me that you were a dancer for the Indianapolis Colts when you were in college. And I was like, what the? Because like, as you know, like I'm a huge football nerd. Like I love football. And I am definitely, so I must say this because I am from Maryland. So I am a Baltimore Ravens fan all the way. So there's no way in hell that I could ever be a Colts fan, regardless. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. So, like, how did that actually happen for you? Like, how did you become a dancer for the Colts?
Yes, and I can definitely attest to you being, you are so knowledgeable when it comes to football, Tisha. I mean, like, everyone, do not sleep on Tisha, like, and her football knowledge, because, like, she's being dead serious.
Have you wondered why I'm in like 3 fantasy leagues every year? Money, money, money.
And it's even more like, and I remember when you told me that you and Chris were, you have season tickets and stuff. Now here we are in Indy, we have season tickets.
Awesome.
Like for the Colts. Yeah, Jacob, this is like his dream. I mean, before we had a house in Indy to move into, we had Colt, like he had the season tickets. So we were like, well, we got to make it happen one way or another.
Well, next time we play each other, we're definitely going to the game together, whether it's in Indy or Baltimore. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. But how my dancing days for the Colts started. Okay, so I obviously graduated high school. Definitely was hard. It was, I think everyone who, has an experience in high school where you are on a team, right? Or you're playing sports throughout your 4 years. And it was challenging, like to be done with all of that, to say goodbye to all of that was really, it was a little bit more, like just took a toll on me in a way that I wasn't really expecting. Because I don't think I realized, oh my gosh, this is just it. This is it for dance. Like, not only are you like just saying goodbye to like, of course I have like my dance team that you grow so close to. Obviously losing my mom as a senior in high school. They were such an important, like truly instrumental part of like my kind of getting through that healing in a way. So that was all hard within itself. But then dancing, it just goes back to just love to dance. I was like, I got to figure something out, how can I continue? And this goes, I'm fresh, I'm in school. I definitely don't have like the money to just be spending on dance classes, right? Like like in between my classes for school. I didn't, that's just not where I was at. So I was like, what can I do? What can I do? Started looking into like the NFL, football, dancing. And I wasn't like on the team right away. What happened was you try, for my experience, at least, I know a lot of things have changed, but you try out and then you, of course, make the team, don't make the team. But the year that I tried out, I think there was maybe like 15 to like 20 of us that they invited back for this like training camp. And it was the first year they were doing it. Oh my gosh, when I got that email, because I didn't make the team right away, it was, and this goes, unfortunately it came to an end just because when it comes to NFL dancing, there's some politics involved and it's just not like that. Like, it's just not dancing. That was a big learning experience for me. Here I am, baby Brae, not baby Brae, but, high school Brae coming out. And it's just not what you thought it was going to be. They were coming in and taking your weight and taking your arm and putting, seeing, like, it was like that part of things especially as I reflect back, I'm just like, ooh, that's just not like who I am as a person. I just really wanted to dance ultimately. So did the training camp. It was amazing. I made some really, really great friends that I still am friends with today. Wonderful, wonderful women. Very talented. Loved the coaches, loved that whole dynamic. It was actually really great because it was, my first year of school. I had that. I was meeting all these really awesome people. And then that led me to dancing, for the following year. Really fun, everything. But I came to a point where it was like, okay, this isn't, like I said, there's just a lot of politics when it comes to that stuff. And I was just in a place where with school and working and interning and, I kind of had to come to, okay, what can I like actually do here? And that's when I decided, not to maybe do the cult stuff anymore, but then I started doing like more of the dance classes and stuff like that. I made some really great relationships. I actually auditioned with a group of girls for like America's Got Talent. We were just like, of course we think we were going to like be on the show, but it was just like a really fun experience. So it's led me to a lot of really great things and great memories for sure.
Talk to me. So I'm very curious. So like throughout your entire life, like you were super artistic, dancing, writing, drawing. So like, where do you actually start your college career at?
So I lost my mom as a senior in high school. So I actually stayed home for my first year and went to like a community college. I actually did that. And then I moved to Indianapolis the next summer. And I was actually going to school for dental at first. Okay.
That's so weird. You have to tell, like, why dental?
So I was actually in my high school. My high school had a program. It was called vocational, and you could once you're a senior, you could pick. There's like a bunch of different vocationals you can do. You can kind of do like there's a dental vocational, which is what I did. There's like a more medical. I'm forgetting what. It was essentially for people who wanted to go into the medical, field, or like nurses, doctors, that type of stuff, anatomy. And there's a couple other different ones. So if my dad, I honestly was kind of that. I think I definitely was one of those things. As you grow up, my dad was definitely in my ear because I know what his intentions were. Of course, he loved me. He wanted me to succeed. But it was definitely in a time where he was kind of whispering in my ear, like, oh, like doctor or like dentist, And I think a lot of people in our generation can kind of relate to that. And I always knew that writing, I was a writer at heart, that I wanted to like go to school for that stuff, but I tried to follow the path of dental. I graduated my senior year of high school actually being like a certified dental assistant, because you had to do like clinicals, you had to like log hours. And then one day in the summer, I was working at this other office filling in, and actually there was a situation where this little kid had like, I started like kind of like, doing stuff, like changing his rubber bands on his braces and stuff. And he had like really, really bad gingivitis, which means that you just can start bleeding. Like really, I fainted is what happened. I fainted. And in that moment, I was like, okay, this is not for me. I mean, my whole first year of college I was in like the fungi classes. I was in like biology, all this stuff, Tisha, that was so unnatural to me. I mean, I'm a writer. I was in AP English. I was in, I was never out here excelling at like science and stuff like that. So I guess, what I'm getting at is I thought I did that. I was following that kind of path, and that my dad was in my ear about a little bit, which I joke around with him now. But at the end of the day, I was like, this is not for me. And I decided to enroll into like journalism school in Indianapolis, where I went to, it's called IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. And really what that school does, it offers, because we're right by, Purdue University and IU, like out where I am in Indiana, that it's like a combination. So certain, if you're going for engineering, of course, that would fall under like the Purdue, like programs. Or for me, I got my degree from Indiana University, technically, in journalism. So I started following that, all roads led me back to journalism and writing at the end of the day. And that's just where I thrived, and switched over from dental right away. But it's so crazy. And people still, I will say, like, from all the dental conferences I went to and stuff, like, in high school through that vocational, I was taking in all these like whitening strips and like loving all these like products. And to this day, people will like compliment, like, like I sound like really, we might have to cut this out because it might sound but like people would compliment like my smile and stuff. And I'd be like, oh, I literally got like $200 like whitening strips from this like awesome dental conference. That's like my takeaway from like my world of dental. I feel like it's just led me to like my white teeth, and like I was like, I gotta get out of there. So
Hey Goat fans, I can't believe it, but we are already starting to prep for season 2. So, if you're interested in being a guest on Not Your Average Goat and are ready to share your story with the world, please reach out. You can submit a request at notyouraveragegoat.org/contact.
So you majored in journalism. Like, did you know at the time you wanted to go into social media, or like, what were you thinking?
Oh yeah. So that was interesting too. So, it was technically, I was in the School of Journalism, but my concentration was like public relations. So I left school thinking I was about to be this like big, like badass, like PR publicist for like the Cubs or something, like something so like the most, you learn about like crisis PR, of course, you learn about all this stuff. And I for sure thought I was going to be like that one, like that girl, like, oh, like I am like the publicist for like X celebrity. Like I laugh about it all the time because I literally ended up in like IT and like the tech industry could not have been more opposite. But so yeah, so then I was in it was definitely an interesting time because this was when like social media was on the rise. So I always say too, I am very lucky. I feel like I got in like the first company I worked for, we were forming that digital team, right? We were like, what does this look like? What do we call ourselves? Because we were doing like website development and like social media marketing, writing the copy for different tech vendors, to use to promote certain, whatever it was, events, whatever it may be. That's when I learned a lot of like paid like social media. So no, I guess like I was not expecting in any way. We definitely had like speakers brought into some of like the PR classes, right? And like they were definitely my mentor and all of like my professors in the journalism school. They were definitely putting an emphasis on like social media marketing is going to be like where it's at. Like this is like it's on the rise, So like I was definitely hearing from like people who are coming in from like nonprofits and sharing like kind of like their experience and like what their career looked like. And then some people will be coming in from more of like on the corporate side of things and sharing. And like that's when social media marketing, I feel like was really starting to take a big, especially in like the tech industry, which is where I started out. So I really feel like my timing, I'm really thankful for the timing of like getting into that space when I did, because it was almost like, I feel like I was like on, like from the very beginning, I've really seen like this evolution of just of social media marketing. I mean, to think about the last 5 years alone, how much it has changed. Even now, right, in these last 2 years, to see like the power of storytelling on social. I mean, it's really incredible. So, but no, social has changed in such a way. And guess what? I love like having these conversations too, like especially like with my dad, right? Because he's so fascinated of like the back end, because doing social for a brand or a company, it's so different for like your personal social. I think there's elements that are now coming, that are more noticeable, as like, for example, like humanizing, being very authentic in creating your content. I think we're definitely seeing that just works across all areas, like whatever type of social it is, of course. But again, right, there's some, like, there's a line when it comes to like being an influencer on social or like running a corporate social media. And then it's kind of working towards how you can like incorporate all of those different things just to come across as like, at the end of the day, it's like on social, I mean, there's crazy stats that I always learn from like these digital summits I go to every year. But, they say that people scroll through on average, like 600 feet of content a day.
Oh,
so
wow.
Like, what are you going to do? And and it's been proven that now in 2022, especially, our attention spans, they're like goldfish. I mean, it is truly, right? Like if it's not something that's like stopping you, like as you're in real time, as you're scrolling on your phone, if it's not something that's like maybe visually appealing or the type of content that usually resonates with you, like all that is so important. And then it kind of helps tee up like how you can use social in that way, like as that tool and like as, using the power of like harnessing the power of social. That's just like, how is this content going to resonate with someone that you want to be like, you want that person to be resonating with your content. So there's just so many like aspects to it. And now we're seeing that now there's TikTok, right? People love that digestible, like I almost call it like edutainment type of content, because it's like, it's educational and it's entertaining. So it's like figuring that out. And then it's the algorithms. Oh my gosh, I could talk algorithms all day. It's so there's just so many different, layers to that.
First of all, I love that word edutainment. You need to trademark that if it's not already taken. Secondly, 600 feet of content. Like I'm just kind of thinking about my phone and it's about like 6 inches. That means I would have to scroll 1,200 times a day. And I'm just sitting here thinking, do I do that?
Yeah, and I may be a little off of the number, but I do not think it's far off because I remember my jaw dropping, honestly, when I was like listening on this presentation, because I'm just like, whoa. Because then, and you're right, Tisha, personally, since I do social for my job, I try not to be on my phone as much as possible. And it's especially with what's going on in this world, it can get very heavy having to kind of balance, like, okay, you do it for your job, right? And you're kind of thinking of like, how do we approach this, right? And then you think, and then you go, you're on social from your personal, and a lot of things that I talk to, fellow social media marketers about is you can't turn it off. It's so hard to turn it off. If I follow Ben and Jerry's, which, they have such a great social presence, and I love the way that they take a stance. And so I'm using them as an example because maybe in my personal time, I'm scrolling through my, feeds, but I am like, I don't stop thinking through the lens of, I could like, this is a good idea for like my job. You know what I mean? So, I've had to really I have to actively work towards that every single day. Like I'll just kind of be like, okay, you know what? I need to like chill. But sometimes you're just kind of scrolling. You're not even looking at your damn phone, but your finger is just, scroll.
You're an avid documentarist. And so I know that there was a documentary put out about social media a couple years ago. Did you watch that one?
Oh yes. The Social Dilemma. I think you're referring to. It's on Netflix. Yes. I had some people text me for sure after that and was like, oh my gosh, why am I just like thinking of you right now watching this documentary? Because it's a really good look behind the scenes of how targeting works, which I know you know a ton about.
Oh, yeah.
You honestly kind of taught me really what the foundation of like what targeting was. And that's where it gets I think the targeting, and when people start to understand that these algorithms are literally created to show you content to almost sway you in a different, that's what goes back to when people don't really understand the behind the scenes of like how just like the internet works, right? Or just content and the SEO content in general, like of ads being served to you. People get freaked out because they'll be talking about a shoe. Then they go on their phone and there's the ad of the shoe. It's kind of scary in the sense of like, I could see why people, as like my brother, for example, when he watched it, he was like, oh my gosh. Like, and to me, I'm like, this is what I'm talking about, because there's just so many, it's at the end of the day, people are trying to reach, their audiences that they're trying to tap into, and they want to be the person to like, or the company or the product that's like kind of persuading you to like, be like on their side, so that's why it's like, it's really crazy. And it's just, I think like, that's why I love that documentaries are getting made. And like, this is people like, from the original teams of like YouTube, Facebook, like these are all people that are like engineers that are working in the back end of like, and it's so fascinating to hear them break it down and for them to be so incredibly transparent and honest to, this is the person who's on the team. Their intention and their goal was something completely different than what social has turned into. And now it's finding that like that balance, right? Of like, this was like our goal that we wanted to accomplish. We wanted to connect people. We wanted to create a platform and technology that was allowing people to communicate in ways and in communities too, right? Like bringing like that community, like building that community, but look at how kind of sideways social has gone because of the technological advances and the targeting and all that can be done. So I'm always like, I work in like B2B though, I'm like a tech. I'm not like creeping on you too much. I'm like trying to, I'm trying to like sell or create like cybersecurity ads. I don't want to be like, I'm not like that much, because that goes back to, there's been a lot of companies, and there's another really good documentary. Actually, you might be referring to the other one too, where please, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's like the Cambridge like documentary, which was like around the whole like political like scheme of things, right? There was like that big thing that came out where it was like this digital agency that was working the Trump party to help, like, that were targeting people that didn't know that were being targeted. And like the VP of, like, a bunch of people had to be like whistleblowers. That's also a really, really good documentary, because you're really learning again how powerful these social media platforms really are when you're trying to reach a certain type of, demographic or audience with the content that you want to get out. There's so many, as I keep saying throughout this whole interview, there's so many layers to it. It's really interesting.
Hi, my wonderful goat friends. Firstly, thank you so much for your support and listening. If you're enjoying this conversation and other episodes of the podcast, I'd like to ask you to please give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you are listening on right now. And if you're so inclined, we love to hear your feedback in a full review. Also, might be a great idea to hit subscribe on that platform you're listening to right now so you can get notified of new episodes as they are released. Thank you so much again for being one of our loyal GOAT listeners.
So you and also your brother, who we haven't really talked a lot about, but you and your brother grew up with your mom who had chronic vertigo, and it was a big part of your lives. Now, firstly, I feel like I kind of just want to talk about like what vertigo is, because I feel like, at least for myself, and I'm sure other people, like when I think of vertigo, I just think, oh, you get dizzy sometimes, but like I know it's definitely more than that. So can you talk about it, at least like from your perspective of like watching your mom? Like, what did you see? Like, what did her vertigo look like?
Yeah. So one thing about growing up with a parent that is not feeling well, it takes a long time after the fact to really start understanding it. Because of course, in that moment when you are younger, especially, I think, and this is one of those regrets, Tisha, that I have, if I'm being honest, my brother and I both, like, what it really looked like to me was I couldn't have my friends come over a lot because my mom was napping or trying to lay down. She laid down a lot. That would frustrate me, honestly. It looked like, always having those really, really terrible migraines, exactly as you said, that dizziness. And let's be honest, when you kind of see someone laying down, you're not bringing that energy. You're not, you kind of feel like, oh, why are you laying down like again? How are you like still tired? And as I say that out loud, it makes me feel so, it's just, I still try and learn more about vertigo, because it's just one of those things where I've never really experienced like extreme headaches or migraines. The word migraines is just, when I hear it, it is like I just feel like there's like a punch in my gut almost, because it just takes me back. It was a lot of depression too. And now I see that as I'm older, as I look back, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, my mom doesn't like shower a ton. And I know it sounds like really, like, honestly, one, gross probably, but that's a sign of depression, essentially. When people that aren't taking care of their personal hygiene, it's full on depression. And I did not know that at the time, but it was just, friends couldn't really come over. She would be a chaperone on field trips and she wouldn't be able to make it last minute, because it was just, now I see that she was just trying to lay down to ultimately feel better, as we all try and lay down, right, when we're not feeling well. So that's kind of like, if I could sum it up, that's really what it was. So my mom tried a lot of different things to help. And I think that's another reason why it's so hard for me as I grow older. And please excuse me, I'm already getting a little emotional. Because of course, until you're a little bit older, you can never even begin to understand what like living life on the edge feels like, right? As someone who is battling their mental health struggles. But my mom tried acupuncture. She had open heart surgery to help with a chemical or some type of imbalance. And I'm definitely not, I'm not a medical expert, so please forgive me for not using, the correct, I guess, like verbiage or words when I'm speaking about this. But she had an ear surgery because they thought that could help with her, like vertigo. And I still think vertigo is definitely still one of those things where there's a lot of education that needs to happen around it. I think a lot of people in their lives deal with vertigo, and it's kind of hard to put into words. But the moment when I was kind of like, okay, like things are a little different was when like a lot of like those medical procedures started to happen. And that was until high school. I mean, she was always going to different doctors. My dad was taking her out to Chicago. But it was probably high school when it really hit me that my mom had, an illness, and it did, affect our lives. So and now even more so, I look back and I mean, it's just one of those things. I wish I could have understood a little bit more at that age, but at the same time, I've done a lot of work through therapy not to put that on myself. But it's hard not to.
I mean, I can definitely see how, especially when you were younger and not being able to have your friends come over and have like sleepovers or play dates. But then at the same time, like your mom always napping, feeling like I'm supposed to be having fun. I'm a kid. Like I could definitely see how that could be like so challenging, like especially because you didn't really understand what was going on. As you got a little bit older, like when you became a teenager and you started to realize what was going on with your mom, are there any specific experiences that stood out to you as you got a little bit older and interacting with her and like finally getting to understand? Like, did you guys start to talk about it, or like were you more participatory in her doctor's visits and things like that?
Yes, I was, because there was a time when my mom could no longer drive. Yeah. So my brother and I were, because my dad works, he would go to work, and my brother and I were kind of responsible, right, for taking her to her appointments. Again, I definitely did not understand the severity of the situation. I didn't. And, even seeing her get needles all in her head through acupuncture. I mean, there were times I witnessed it. My brother a little bit more so. And one of the stories that really sticks out to me that my brother just recently shared with me, actually, it goes back to really when you think about just how much still needs work, and just when it comes to the mental health conversation, one of the things my brother shared with me was taking my mom to, I forget where you go for like disability, but essentially my mom was trying to get on disability because it was coming to a point where she could no longer drive. She was really, struggling with her vertigo, and obviously it was paired with just mental health. But people looked at my mom and laughed and was like, "Oh, you're sad, so you feel like you just like should get disability," And my mom, I guess, freaked out and was just like, "You guys don't understand," and that's so hard for me, Tisha. To know that just in 2010, that like that's how people were reacting and responding. And unfortunately, it's still like that today. People, you'll get they look at your medical history. And again, I know I'm speaking a little bit broader here, but it just goes back to like, then what can be done for the people that are really suffering, just trying to live day by day. Right. And I think my brother probably in that moment was like, okay, whoa. But like me taking her to her appointments, and it definitely started to hit me a little bit more. But if I'm being totally honest, I think I was shrugging it off, and it's really hard for me to say that, but I rather acknowledge and own it now and like, this is why I'm using like my voice and story honestly now, because I lived that, and I've seen that, and I really did see my mom try to do everything she possibly could. And it's really hard to look back on that and see that, and just not, it just is the way, it just is what it is, And so I think that was those moments when I started having to drive her around and stuff. That was just different. No one else had to drive their mom around, like they were getting drove around. Not that it mattered, but that was at that age, it definitely was something that was just a little different than what my friends had to do.
our society like sucks big time. And like to be told that, oh, like you're feeling sad and so you want disability because of that. Like, no. Like in addition to vertigo, like there's also people dealing with like just like plain depression, like, and your mom is dealing with depression on top of vertigo. And the fact that like that was the response, and thinking about like 2010, 12 years ago was not that long ago. And to think that that was the response, and honestly, like you said, still today, like there are still people who respond like that. Like there is someone who I unfortunately am close to in terms of them being a family member who was like, oh, like depression's not a real thing. Like I sometimes feel sad. Does that mean I have depression? Like I'm basically not acknowledging that it's a real thing.
Yeah.
And it's so sad. And it fucking sucks that was the reality back then. And that 12 years later, yeah, I mean, it's not really that long of a time if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, but still like in 2022, like there are still people who are responding like that and not treating depression and vertigo as if they are actual mental health disorders, chronic conditions. It's so sad to think about that. But it's also so sad to think that there have been strides that we've taken over the last 12 years. And like, I can't even imagine, like, if you've pondered, like, hey, like, if this happened 12 years later, like, would my mom have gotten like a little bit more help?
Exactly. That's exactly. I mean, I even think about the great news of what just was announced. So there is now officially a suicide hotline. You can dial 988 and it will directly connect you now with a suicide hotline. And that was my first thought. And, maybe that wouldn't have been the case. But what's really hard for families and for, loved ones who, and they, this is like in the suicide community, mental health community, they do call like loved ones who lose, when they lose their loved ones to suicide, they call like a suicide survivor. So like technically like my brother and I and all the other families and people that have lost their loved ones to suicide, like there is a name of like almost that community because it's so different. It's so different because there's all of the shame and stigma still associated with it. But you're right. And that's what's really hard for me, especially because I reflect back and I truly see how many things my mom tried. Like she tried so many different things to like just help her feel better. And every single person to think about that, they looked at her and again, you're lucky if you don't experience depression, right? You are a lucky person if you don't feel that heaviness. And I know that could definitely be, I'm sure people will take that. But like, this is coming from, again, I fell into my own now that I have grown up, now that I am older, living through a pandemic, right? And I think the pandemic definitely it was such a push in the mental health conversation, right? Because so many people were feeling low. They were feeling at their lowest point in life. And it was, some people, it was just, it was unfortunately kind of reactivated through that whole experience. But a lot of people for their first times ever were feeling depression. Right. And I think it definitely, people opening up and sharing. I mean, I think it definitely helped with this big push around like just the mental health conversation. I'm really not that I'm grateful that anyone has to feel like that ever. That is why it's so, the last thing you want is to someone feel like that. And that's when it comes to when people kind of make their comments about, oh, I don't believe it. It's almost like, well, I almost wouldn't expect you to because you've never felt it yourself. And depression and mental health struggle, that comes from like living that life. And it's really hard. There's not even enough words ever to like kind of truly, articulate what that is and how it feels. And it's almost like until it happens to you or your family member or anything, that's why I almost give the benefit of the doubt that people may, but like what needs to happen is just really hearing out different stories. And that's why I like to, when I do talk about my mom, I like to share, like, my mom tried everything, like I remember her logging, and this was even before like webinars were really a thing, but I remember her logging into literal like migraine groups on like chats and stuff because she was just trying to find people that could relate to her. And that's so sad when you think about it, that society isn't providing. And now again, we're in 2022 and thankfully it is finally happening. But think about it, it is 2022. The pandemic was in 2020. Literally in the past 5 years alone, to see the steer of like the conversation on mental health. I mean, it's amazing. And that's why I'm like, wow, I almost feel like this is my purpose. I feel like this is a time in the world and in my life where I can finally really speak to this and share what I went through, because it does take, it's been 12 years since I've lost my mom, and it does take that long, especially when it comes to suicide and mental health. So there's just, again, there's just so many layers to it. And that's why I'm just happy that finally people are, being just more accepting and just wanting to hear those different perspectives. I feel like that's just what the power of the conversation is going to do. And there's really no other way to like, there's just sometimes, unfortunately though, like people are just not there yet, but just to know that progress is being made because I think about too, gosh, not only for my mom, but every single person who has suffered like beyond like 2022, right? Or like it's like, that's so sad to think about all those people suffering in silence for so long. My mom's vertigo, it drove her into depression. So it kind of drove her into that mental, a lot of people are suffering in silence by just trying to be who they are. But because of the conversation not being there yet, right? It drives them into depression. It drives them when they feel like they can't be them full selves, whether that is, like it drives them to a place and their mental health completely just, it's kind of crazy how paired it is, right? And how one kind of leads to another in some ways. So yeah, it's just, and however we can talk about it. And sometimes just reliving your trauma and speaking to it. I think anyone who's gone through any type of traumas, knowing that they can just kind of, if it can help one person, that's like the goal with that. Because at the end of the day, you just don't want anyone to feel what you felt in your own experience and your own story. So
hi there, this concludes part 1. Be sure to tune in to part 2 next week to catch the second half of this incredible conversation. Not Your Average Goat is produced and edited by yours truly, with music by Sergey Quadrado and Anton Vlasov. All content is copyrighted and should not be recreated, reproduced, or reused without explicit consent. Please visit notyouraveragegoat.org/contact for questions.